Good morning, everybody. Sudan is the latest country in the world to be subject to the United States spreading war and misery around the world, just as it has done in Ukraine and Syria and Libya and many other countries over the last few decades. It's incredible to be speaking like this because we are propagandized by the Western mainstream media to think that every single thing that is done by Western governments is good and all the other countries in the world are bad and barbaric, but this simply is not the case. People are just hearing about a crisis and a situation in Sudan on the Western mainstream media really this week because we're hearing about Western nationals in Sudan having to flee and having to evacuate, and the British government has been pretty poor even at evacuating our own British citizens. There are thousands of them possibly were trapped and stranded in Khartoum and other places, possibly would get massacred over the next couple of weeks if they didn't step up the evacuation. So that's the angle at which the Western mainstream media is talking about Sudan. There's a conflict, it's come out of nowhere, and Western nationals are in danger. But the thing is, this conflict hasn't come out of nowhere, this new conflict, I should say, and it's been brewing for over a year. And it started when the Sudanese government started talks with Russia for Russia to develop and build a naval base on the Red Sea coast. The United States government, the Biden regime, warned Sudan not to go ahead with making any deal with Russia to do this, to create a naval base. But Sudan, the Sudanese government, just decided they were going to do it anyway. And on February the 20th this year, they did sign a deal with Russia for them to build a naval base. 2 days later, the United States gave $200 million in humanitarian aid to Sudan. I think that probably didn't go to the government, but went through NGOs and private corporations, I can imagine. Then, soon after, a couple of weeks after, on March the 9th, the Angel of Death, Victoria Newland, visited Sudan to talk about strengthening democracy. And then a month later, a conflict broke out and began between a rebel faction, which suddenly had got lots of arms, and they decided to try to organize a conflict and a coup against the government, so the conflict started on April the 8th between the Sudanese armed forces controlled by the government and this rebel group called the Rapid Support Forces. So since then, the situation in Sudan has descended into chaos. Now, we can only imagine how much the rebel group, the RSF, have been supported and funded by the United States as a direct response to them not wanting Sudan to tie up with Russia, and in a larger sense to join the BRICS economic group, which is challenging the economic hegemony of the G7 at the moment. So this is what's going on. Just recently then, April the 22nd, the United States decided that they would evacuate all of their citizens from Sudan. The UK has been forced to follow suit, although they're not doing it very well. It's taken them a few days to realise the gravity of the situation. And of course, the mainstream media in the UK, for once, is actually highlighting an issue on behalf of a few thousand British people who would be stranded in there and maybe die if the government didn't act to evacuate them. So they've been caught with their pants down, basically, the UK government, again, as usual. But then, more seriously now, we hear that there is a biolab in Sudan with all kinds of pathogens in it that has been taken over, and there's been all kinds of leaks of pathogens out of this biolab in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. So straight away the narrative is there's going to be deadly pathogens going around the world, and that is laying the ground for another round of lockdowns and injections and all kinds of economic insanity and political insanity like we've had over the last 3 years. So if we are not careful and don't fight against this narrative, this plays right into the hands of the World Health Organization, who are at the moment trying to enact a power grab of the likes we've never seen before in taking charge of the health policies of all their member nations, 192 member states around the world. Now, that hasn't been enacted yet. They're trying to put in place a pandemic preparedness accord with lots of changes to the international health regulations in order to allow them to take full control of nations' policies if they declare an emergency, but they still have enough draconian powers in order to coerce nations and people living in the nations that are members of the WHO to undergo lockdowns and all these kind of things that were put in place in 2020. So this is now building into another potential global fabricated pandemic situation. And also a British minister has warned that in Britain we have a huge crisis of illegal immigration across the Channel, with tens of thousands of military-aged men coming illegally every year to the UK and getting rewarded for arriving illegally and claiming asylum and getting hotel rooms and free board and free money. And one of the government ministers in the fake Conservative government has just warned this situation in Sudan is going to exacerbate and make the migrant crisis in the English Channel even worse. Be prepared for more military-age men to be coming across the Channel this year because of the situation in Sudan, even though they just have not got a grip on it since it started in about 2019. So here we are in the 4th year of the migrant crisis, or maybe the 5th year of the migrant crisis, I think. And the government is just saying, well, nothing we can do. There's war in Sudan, so it's going to get worse. Don't expect us to be able to do anything about it this year. And that's the attitude of the fake Conservative government, who have been actively enabling, aiding and abetting the migrant crisis in the Channel by sending the Royal Navy and the Border Force to pick people up in the Channel rather than push them back to where they launched from, on the beaches of France, which is what a border force is supposed to do. It's supposed to stop people coming illegally across your border, not help them to come illegally across the border. So everything is inverted here. So we have this situation. The losers again are going to be the ordinary people living in Sudan, just like we've seen in Ukraine the last year, a completely unnecessary conflict stoked up by the United States government, deep state in particular, not the people of the United States, but the people, the powers that be in the government, and of course the powers that be in the Western governments, with the noble exception of Hungary and Serbia. And also NATO finding for itself a purpose in escalating conflict and war, so that the military-industrial complex corporations that are tied into the governments and the NATO infrastructure can sell more weapons. Never mind how many poor young Ukrainian men are slaughtered, and now however many poor Sudanese people, men, women, and children, are going to be caught up in another completely unnecessary conflict. And I lead the Heritage Party in the UK, and I'm the only party leader, I think, of a viable political party which is standing candidates all over the place, because there are parties with party leaders who don't stand any candidates. They're not there just playing at politics, but we're actually a serious political party that is going to, we're aiming to be able to stand candidates in every seat in the general election next year. So as a leader of a political party in the UK, I would say, let's stop escalating and creating unnecessary conflicts and wars around the world. Stay out of other countries unless it affects our direct national interests. This is not a new war that the Western powers that be seem to want to be stoking up and escalating. This is just the wrong thing to do. There should not be any involvement in funding and arming a rebel group that is just going to create chaos for the Sudanese people. And this is what's happening. And that is what is not getting reported at all in the Western mainstream media, because all they're saying at the moment, as I said, is, oh, isn't it terrible? There's Westerners who've got to be evacuated because they might get caught up in the fighting. No recognition at all that the fighting has been started by the United States, deep state and government, because they are playing geopolitics in Sudan. And it's going to have all kinds of knock-on ramifications, as I've said. And we need to just stop doing this and stay out of things if it doesn't involve our countries in the West. There you go.